placed your
Sure.
position. So
Sure, Stephen. I'm the acting director for transit policy at Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada right now. And with me is Miranda.
I'm a
okay.
senior analyst with the integrated regional planning team at Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada. We're also still adapting to the new acronym.
It takes a while.
Yeah.
Our emails are still INFC. It's confusing.
Okay. And I just was looking in the wrong cell in my spreadsheet, and I see all of your wonder. But if for people who are wondering, Andrew enjoys spending time with family, staying active, and reading. So I do have some further details to share, but enough of it.
Not super relevant. So okay.
Yeah. Let me pass it along, and look forward to seeing how you have been thinking through equity in your transportation policies at the ministry.
Sounds good. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully let me know, folks, if you can kind of see this sort of opening slide here. Hopefully that's good. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about the Canada Public Transit Fund, which launched recently in July, and particularly the equity lens on that. So I'll kind of run through the general stuff to open up, and then Miranda is going to talk a little bit more specifically about our integrated regional plans under the Metro Region Agreement stream. So, and hopefully we'll be quick enough to leave some time for questions. So basically, we've got the Canada Public Transit Fund was launched in July on the 17th, I believe it was. And it's sort of the context is that the Prime Minister first announced permanent federal public transit funding back in February of 2021 and to average $3 billion a year, starting in 2026-27, funding public transit and active transportation. And we did some consultations that resulted in some key principles for us that, the funding should provide stability and predictability, that it should foster complete transit-oriented communities, that it should be, have an approach that's really grounded and rooted in data and evidence and good long-term integrated planning. The funding would be linked to the ambition and to outcomes, and that we would want to have, clear sort of tangible actions to go along with transit on the housing side to increase housing supply and improve affordability. So that kind of manifested in a program, as announced, that has these three components. We've got Metro Region agreements, which are sort of long-term agreements with a region rather than a city. So like the region of Greater Toronto or Metro Vancouver or Greater Montreal or places like that kind of like regional lens on things that provide a chunk of federal funding. And in exchange for that, we asked regions to complete what's called an integrated regional plan and bring that forward, which is basically sort of a business case for transit in the region that says, here's the projects that we're looking to advance. And here are all the things we're doing alongside those projects in terms of sort of supportive policies, whether those be land use reforms, density, diversity of land use, or other sort of transportation policy measures. And tell us how all those things fit together and are going to produce the outcomes that we're looking for. We've also got baseline funding, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's pretty straightforward. It's again long-term agreements with an individual transit system or community. So Toronto Transit Commission or Cape Breton Regional Transit or what have you, one of these an individual system. And that's again meant to provide kind of a stable envelope calibrated to what projects they expect folks to bring forward, but meant to provide that long enough term of funding to give people some stability, predictability, and ability to plan and execute efficiently. And there was a window for expression of interest for that, which closed at the end of September. So we're very excited that that's moving forward. And then there is targeted funding, which basically, get call outs for people to submit projects. For those who are familiar, it's very similar. If you know our Active Transportation Fund or Rural Transit Solutions Fund or Zero Emission Transit Fund, these are kind of examples of the types of things we might expect to see again in the future, where it's sort of a national call out. It says we're looking for projects of this type. So getting the equity in the CPTF, it's positioned as one of our four core objectives. So we have these four objectives: increase use of public transportation, housing supply and affordability, tackle climate change and climate resilience. And improve public and active transportation options for all, including especially Indigenous people and equity deserving groups. And so we really tried to put equity front and center. The government really tried to put equity front and center in this program as one of the really key things that we're driving for. And it's sort of laced throughout the program, as you'll see as we get a little farther in. Okay, how does the CBDF trying to achieve that? I mean, first and foremost, it's that it is a public transit and active transportation fund, which to a certain extent has some inherent equity benefit. It provides the opportunity for households to save on transportation, enables people who don't have access to private vehicles to get around, all those kinds of things. We know that this is, these modes of transportation are especially important for women, youth, seniors, low-income people, et cetera. And so by dint of what it invests in, it does that somewhat, but we do put a bit of a finer point on it than that. So, our first kind of bullet there is sort of what I said. It's providing that stability and predictability that helps people plan for the long term, helps systems plan for the long term, and we hope build better transit systems, which benefits equity deserving groups, disproportionately sometimes. Making sure that we have the highest applicable accessibility standards are being met for projects that we fund. We have a number of measures in place, particularly in the MRAs and the integrated regional plans, to encourage meaningful engagement with equity deserving groups. And we also have sort of some requirements that Miranda will speak to in more depth that try to encourage a real focus on equity in planning at the system level, and then again, eventually at the project level as well. So that's kind of the broad overview. I will make a quick mention too of the Rural Transit Solutions Fund, which is currently an active fund that we have, falls under the CPTF umbrella, and it's really targeted at rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, all about making sure people have the ability to access daily services, and the things that they need in their day-to-day life, and in a way that makes sense in a rural setting. And it covers both planning and design projects and capital projects. And I believe there's a planning and design intake open at the moment. And so this is like I said, this is the type of thing we should expect to see in future under the Canada Public Transit Fund. I think we can anticipate, nothing is assured, but we can anticipate a rural intake or a similar intake to be opened again in the future, provided all goes as expected. So with that, I'll turn it over to Miranda to talk a little bit about integrated regional plans, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Andrew. So integrated regional plans are one of the submission requirements, kind of the main submission requirement that we have for one of the streams of the Canada Public Transit Fund, so the Metro Region Agreement stream, which is intended to target kind of the most complex urban areas where the systems will kind of cross-cut these boundaries. And as Andrew mentioned, we're really using these documents to understand over a longer term horizon how capital investments and how those are supported, complemented by supporting policies, will advance the objectives of the fund. So IRPs are really intended to help improve federal line of sight on local priorities, enhance collaboration among various orders of government and across these boundaries within regions, and also provide a kind of common framework that will help us maximize outcomes for our 4 core objectives, which include equity. So we have a full guidance document that is published online to help guide applicants through the submission. And we're really asking partners to kind of focus on three core elements. One is first actors, like understanding who is participating in the region, who's kind of helping to advance these various initiatives, recognizing that transit agencies are one component, but some of the actions we're looking for fall within the purview of municipalities as well, particularly as it relates to kind of housing outcomes. So we're also looking to understand kind of what those actions are over this 10-year horizon. So that would include investments, transit projects, active transportation projects, and then also supporting policy actions that help reinforce those investments. And then the last area we really want to understand is, okay, from those actions, what are the impacts and how are those going to advance key outcomes for the Canada Public Transit Fund? So this slide really focuses on some of the specifics that we're interested in from a social equity perspective. So the first one is really as part of the submission, we're looking first to kind of understand what the regional local context is and the various needs. So asking proponents to provide us mapping of priority neighborhoods that have higher proportions of equity deserving populations so that we can kind of interface and understand how this works with the transit and active transportation networks. We're also looking for partners to outline what processes have been used to date to understand key issues, challenges, lived experience. Has there been any kind of outreach or consultation with marginalized groups? And then moving forward, are there any processes that would incorporate these equity considerations in prioritizing investments, be that at kind of this strategic system level or at specific project levels? So the next area we're really interested in understanding is reducing barriers for persons with disabilities. And we're asking as part of the submissions, are there kind of more broadly any strategies to reduce financial, physical, mental safety, cultural barriers that that would make the transit network more fully accessible regardless of age, ability, circumstance? And specifically looking at a strategy to make the network fully accessible and an approach to engagement that ensures the perspectives of persons with lived experience of disabilities are reflected. And then this third pillar here focuses on increasing relative access to jobs and amenities for Indigenous peoples and equity deserving groups. So access to jobs is one of the key metrics that we've identified that really kind of neatly captures this correlationship between land use and the transportation network and is an important signal to whether the groups, particular equity deserving groups, have similar levels of access compared to the general population. And so we've identified three kind of core subgroups: Indigenous peoples, recent immigrants, and low-income persons, and are asking really for proponents to set targets in the future for how access to jobs would increase over a particular horizon. And then based on kind of that projection, what are the strategies and actions that are expected to kind of help them meet that target in the future? And finally, looking as well, given that kind of housing outcomes are a core priority as well, how this intersects with the needs of different equity deserving groups. So we have an overarching priority to increase the supply and affordability of housing near transit projects, and are looking really to understand if there are any supportive policies that are appropriate to the local context that would help minimize displacement of existing residents, and really kind of trying to understand over the long term what the approach is to increasing the supply of affordable housing in these areas adjacent to transit, kind of recognizing those important synergies. And maybe just to kind of conclude, like this is really just our starting point for the program to help understand different approaches and incentivize change at kind of earlier stages of strategic planning. But we also know we'll have opportunities further down the line as project funding applications come in under this stream to kind of look at a more granular project specific level to see if there's any additional requirements that respond to the particularities of the scope and the context of the project. So that's just kind of, I guess, at 10,000 feet, what our approach is. I mean, part of the challenge at this level is trying to kind of capture all the essential elements with an appropriate level of detail, but recognizing that, you know, there's varied, the particular response might vary depending on the local context. So we're interested to see as we work through this process with partners and applicants, kind of what proposals come forward and what strategies are advanced through the integrated regional plans and the MRA stream of the program. I think that's
Yeah, I think that's
pretty
it.
much the overview that we wanted to share.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for that, and it's great to see at long last this important initiative. Not that it took you a long time; it just took our country a long time to develop something like this transit fund at the federal level. So it's really fantastic to see, and then it's of course important to see how you've approached it from a multidimensional perspective in terms of achieving outcomes on different dimensions, and how you've incorporated equity into those into the criteria as well. I will ask I'll just ask a quick question and then open it up to others. But I'm wondering if you can go back one slide, Andrew. I'm wondering about the targets, and I can, based on this, it looks like you're leaving it up to the regional partners to tell you what their targets are for improving accessibility across the different population groups. And I'm wondering if you're providing any guidance on how those targets should be set, or what you think will happen if, they come back to you with your targets and you don't feel like their targets are ambitious enough.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and I'll turn over to Miranda. Maybe you can speak a little bit more to the guidance specifics on it. But the approach we took was, rather than saying we're going to mandate what your target is, we're going to say you guys get to set it, but know that we're evaluating you based on your ambition. And so, to a certain, at least in part, the funding that you get is a function of how ambitious your targets are. And we kind of have a process in place as well to, when we get a target, to assess, like, is it credible based on what you've put in the, in your plan, that you said, this is your target, here's all the actions you're going to take, here are the projects you're looking to build. Do those things kind of line up to that? Does that all make sense together? Or are you kind of like being a bit overly ambitious with your target based on what you've proposed, for example, or under ambitious is in theory also possible? And so trying to put the incentive in place rather than the requirement in place, because, we're talking about a program that's applicable across the country. What's achievable in Toronto and Montreal, and frankly, what's ambitious in Toronto or Montreal, is not the same as what's ambitious or achievable in Winnipeg or Metro Vancouver. So like every place is going to be a bit different. So we wanted to take that approach of, here's the framework, here's what you need to shoot for, know that we're evaluating you for how much impact you're looking to have, and that we're trying to incentivize that, and beyond that it's up to you. But Miranda, I don't know if you want to add to that at all.
Yeah, I guess going back to the question about kind of additional guidance to ensure some sort of consistency, like we are looking to provide, resources that might be available, data sets that we have, or that are available publicly that could be leveraged to help develop these targets. For these ones, we're really kind of looking at the ratio of access. So, and not in this particular slide, but elsewhere as part of the IRP, where we are seeking kind of a target for the general population access to jobs, and then so we'd be looking for kind of a comparison of how access for these particular populations compares to that. So looking to provide some references that would kind of facilitate common approaches, but know that in many cases too, like, partners will probably have access to other data sources that could be leveraged, and can kind of supplement that in developing their targets.
Thanks. And yeah, there's a number of questions from Rick Cicciarelli in the chat. And I think maybe questions probably in that first column, understanding regional context and needs, and especially in terms of processes to for regions to engage with people with lived experiences of different forms of systemic marginalization, including indigenous as well as indigenous populations. What happens in a case where the region might be saying one thing, and then community advocates might be saying another in terms of how successful they've been in equitably engaging with communities around their infrastructure projects?
That's a good question. Miranda, do you want to start or me too?
Yeah, I could take a stab at it. I mean, I guess there's engagement. When I think of engagement, I think of it, there's kind of different levels, different opportunities, knowing that we have kind of this initial phase through the integrated regional plan. That's kind of broader, understanding more the strategic, like kind of system level consultations. And then down the line, as projects come forward, there's also further opportunities to engage on the specifics or design details. So, I mean, I saw the question about requiring for kind of urban indigenous peoples, and the federal government does have kind of duty to consult to ensure that there's adequate consultation related to any potential adverse impacts on indigenous communities, and a kind of a framework in place for how that's approached with proponents. Historically, that's always been at the kind of project level, but because we're bringing forward this more strategic element at the outset, we are looking for ways to kind of ensure that any potentially impacted indigenous communities are made aware and engaged as early as possible, and so trying to kind of make sure that there's markers for that at earlier phases. And that'll give us information in advance before those kind of project specific applications come forward. So a bit more earlier opportunity to identify if there are any issues that need to be addressed prior to moving forward. And so I guess that's specific to kind of the indigenous lens, just because we have that kind of specific obligation. And I think we are, in terms of engaging communities more broadly. One of the advantages of having this kind of strategic milestone at the outset is it does kind of allow us to have a bit more of a line of sight on what's happening, and identify where there might be kind of issues before a project comes forward for funding, or as part of that funding application, we might already have awareness. Andrew, is there anything that you wanted to
I think that's great, well said, Miranda. The one thing I'd add is that I think this is a bit of a new space for us, and we're going to be learning as we go somewhat. And so I think that there's going to be a process of understanding, seeing what occurs in terms of how communities feel when it comes to to the plans when they come in, and whether the engagement has been appropriate. And then there's, like Miranda said, there's also engagement at the project level. And when we get to that project level, there are issues. I think we're going to have to do some learning about how we, gauge those issues and judge those issues. So I wouldn't say we have a super hard and fast approach where I'm going to say like, oh, the federal government's going to side with the community. Like or with the promote. I don't think that that's a reasonable thing to say. I think we're going to, look at projects on their merits when they're brought forward, and we'll have to look at, the framework we've put in place of requirements for engagement and see, okay, are these met? And over time, also try to understand, are those working? Are those getting us the outcomes that we want to have? Which is one of the benefits of a permanent program, is that, we can have some confidence that we're going to be having that conversation again sometime with most of the same people, in terms of the cities and provinces, and the opportunity to kind of learn as we go.
Thanks, guys. And a question from Karina. I think it's Karina. Let me know if I'm wrong, but you've got this slide around how equity is going to be looked at specifically in the IRPs, in the integrated regional plans. But do these kind of requirements carry over into the other streams of funding as well?
So some yes and some not as directly. So we have like our requirement for projects to meet accessibility standards that applies always everywhere. I mean that applied under our past programming as well. So that, for example, applies under baseline. Any targeted funding intakes that we do would apply. As far as our other kind of requirements, most of them are primarily about IRPs and metro region agreements. It's frankly where we're, putting, probably this is the biggest process, this is probably the biggest chunk of the funding for most regions. And so it's kind of where we have the most leverage and also where we're, when it comes to baseline, we're relying a little bit on the fact of, okay, people are eager to build out their transit systems. That's going to have some positive benefits. And we're also wanting to really make sure that that's a very streamlined process. So for the most part, we're talking about the IRPs. With that said, I think when we're looking at, our targeted funding intakes, we're also going to apply requirements as it makes sense to those intakes. So if we're doing an intake, it could be very equity focused. We could do intakes that are very much about advancing a particular equity objective or addressing challenges for a particular community. If a minister wanted to do that, government wanted to do that, or where it makes sense if we're doing a set of intakes for a type of project where it really makes sense to have those kinds of equity requirements in place, then we would, potentially apply them there as well. So primarily, we're talking about the metro region agreements and less so on baseline. When targeted funding, it's not preset, but there's a lot of opportunity to do things there.
Okay, thanks. And okay, I hope I'm not tossing a hot potato your way, but I'm going to ask one more question before we break for lunch, because I do know that a lot of the activist community is pushing very hard to extend HICC funding into operational, operational budgets, not just capital budgets.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could speak to that desire and where you think the federal government's role is, or I know it's hard for you as an employee, but could you give us a bit of context there for how it was decided to just fund capital in this stage of the program and so on?
I can speak to that a little bit. So part of it is, as officials, as public servants, coming from the departmental perspective, is right. Our department has a mandate for capital. We don't have a mandate to fund operating. It's just not part of what we do. That's not a great excuse for not doing something, as we say. The fact that we haven't done it before or this is the way we do things now is always the worst explanation. I think, for us, what it comes down to is partly there is a huge demand for capital funding still out there. That's our bread and butter. And, that's in part where we're best equipped to focus. At the same time, we don't necessarily have the right levers and lines of sight on operations to do a good job or to be confident in providing operating funding. So, a lot of the things that are going to drive operating costs just fall outside our ability to influence them. And so with that in mind, we just don't feel that we're well positioned as the federal government and close enough on the ground to operations to be an effective, to be confident that we're doing the right things in funding operations. And so we really see provinces and municipalities as being folks who are operating systems, have the levers on, labor and service choices and all these kinds of things that we don't really get to touch and are frankly probably a bit too far removed for people to want us to touch them. And so without those levers, we're really just, we don't feel that we're in a good position to say, sure, here's, operating funding that we then don't have a lot of ability to manage the outcomes of that effectively. Oh, you're muted, Stephen.
So it's up to us to find the levers and hand them to you, and then we'll see it. We'll make it happen. So thank you very much for joining us, Andrew and Miranda. Hope you can stick around for the afternoon. And do have a look through the chat to see if we've missed any questions there. And I hope you can spend some time answering questions. And otherwise, it is our lunch break. And we will be reconvening in 27 minutes. So only 3 minutes into the lunch hour. So I think we're doing well on schedule and looking to see you after the break. Thanks.
Thanks very much.